Good morning, Jeremy.
Now, you've come armed with a prop once again this morning, which is always good fun. I don't know how to describe
They're getting
this.
bigger, these props.
Yes. Well, the last one you brought was a penny. This one is, how do we describe this? Is this a brand of some sort?
It's a branding
iron. It's a branding
iron. We believe it's one of the oldest items we have in the Historical Society collection, because we have some evidence to suggest it belonged to the Bolden brothers, who were very early overlanders and cattlemen, the first European cattlemen into the area. Now, that's a lot of things about the Bolden brothers are a bit problematic. They're a good example of problems of history and how sometimes you can't solve them.
Right.
Because some people suggest that the T5 wasn't their brand. Other people suggest it is, but we're talking today about Lemuel Bolden, who was one of the Bolden family had eight sons, 4 of whom came to Australia, and Lemuel was the only one on the Pioneer Board. But he came with his 2 of his brothers into this area in the very early 1840s. Again, the dates are strange. It says 1836 that he arrived in the district on our Pioneer Board, but we think he probably arrived a little bit later into Melbourne and that area, and came with his brothers Sanford George and Armine was the other one to here.
What interesting names.
They are interesting names. Sanford George was just called George. And they came, initially they seem to have had land around Piranyellik. They were earlier than the earliest pastoral leases, so there's so they probably weren't here even officially. But by late 1840 they'd taken up all the country on the west side of the Hopkins River. So from Warrnambool right up through Mortlake, through Karamat, Macarthur, all the area that around what's now sort of Hawkesdale, Macarthur, Woolsthorpe, Koroit. It was a huge area that they occupied, though they didn't own it or lease it.
So they just said, this is ours,
yep.
As I'm sure a lot of people did at that time.
Yeah, and
yeah, right.
used the natural boundaries like the rivers as their boundary. Later on, they did fence quite a lot of it. They seem to have headquartered at Grasmere on the Merai River Valley there, which is extremely good land. And there they did. There is evidence that they fenced it at those bits, and they fenced what's now Warrnambool. They used what is now the city of Warrnambool between the Hopkins and Merai rivers as their heifer paddock.
Right.
So they built a fence from roughly a little bit north of the ski club on the Hopkins River, right across to the narrow bit of the Merai River, sort of where between Wollaston and where the weir is, and then what's now the township of Warrnambool was where they kept their heifers, and their post and rail fence kept the heifers in.
Right. Okay.
And speaking of heifers, they were renowned for their introduction of pure shorthorn cattle, beef shorthorns, which were then known as Durham oxes, into Australia. The Henties probably brought shorthorn cattle as well, but it's believed that the Boldens had the first purebred strain in Australia, because one of the brothers who remained in England was a noted breeder.
Right.
And these cattle became, that was sort of the rock stars of their day. One particular beast was named Musselman, and he was bought by them for something like 400 guineas.
Wow.
Brought to Australia, and he became a sire of a lot of stud cattle. At the second Royal Melbourne Show in 1842, they took out 5 of the 9 beef cattle prizes. You know, they were regarded as very superior stock. Because they were first into the area, yeah, they built the first fences, but you know, it's often hasn't been spoken about. But they were certainly the first in the serious clashes in the frontier wars as well. And there are documented cases of atrocities against Aborigines that are down to the Bolden brothers. George stood trial at one stage for murdering an Aborigine,
right?
But got off on a technicality. Surprise, surprise. So they're significant for that reason as well.
Yeah, right.
But the other thing that's sort of significant about them is that suddenly things went very wrong for them in a hurry. One of the brothers, George, died suddenly when he was visiting his brother in Melbourne. He fell off a horse and died as a result of that. And then 3 months later, Armine, the other brother, died of a cerebral hemorrhage. So that left Lemuel as the only surviving brother, which is probably why he's the only one on our Pioneer Board, because years later when it's being talked about and they're looking for portraits to go on there, he's the only one that the descendants have a portrait of.
I see, yeah.
So, things went bad from there on. There was, a fire sale. A lot of this vast area that they'd occupied was split up, and other people moving into the area, acquired it and a lot of the stock at rock bottom prices. So the runs in the district that were all split up, became some of the famous runs. So, Foster and Strong got St Mary's at Wangoom, Lake Station at Koroit, Brinal Inn at Purnham, Minja, Turum, just some of the ones that resulted from splitting up that big amount of land that they had.
Right, yeah. Which brings us back to the brand as well then. So what...
Well, it was found in sort of Cooroomook, North Grassmere area on one of the runs that became a Mount Lyell run that had resulted from the split up and was handed to the Historical Society by people who occupied that and who believed that it had been there for that long. So we don't know, we're not sure, and that's why history's interesting, I think.
Yes.
Lemuel is the surviving brother. He left the district. The clergyman brother in Geelong, in Melbourne, went back to England, and Lemuel stayed in the colony. He ended up in Gippsland and acquired Strathfield Station and held that for 15 years or so. So he's probably the success of the family.
Right. Okay. Right. So perhaps not a glowing story when it comes to perhaps some of the history around Warrnambool, but what's certainly an interesting one, I suppose. And
so the pastoral history really of the area starts with the Bolden brothers.
Yeah. Fantastic. Lovely. Janet, thanks again very much.